Number 1. Become guardians of the land by learning about the ecosystems within and with which you coexist. 2. Rewrite the culture of property ownership. Replace with a culture of guardians of the land and its ecosystems. Rewrite common law. Become commoners without lords, landowners. Know your history and tell your story. Take your freedom not from others in perpetuity, but from within and for everyone. Co-create through dialogue, not consumption. Art the Common. In response to a world where commercial interests dominate our social infrastructure and control our planet's resources, I plot a reworking of the common and use art to redefine the rights of the common. Part 1. The plot. Privatisation of public space and ultimately the monetisation of natural resources leave us feeling unsupported by the abundance of life on this planet. On a local level, control of resources and the upward redistribution of wealth results in a lack of opportunity. People increasingly lack the funds to secure housing, food, and easy access to green spaces. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, the richest 1% of the world's population are getting wealthier, owning more than 48% of global wealth. The governments around the world continue to encourage this upward redistribution of wealth. One of the ways they do this is by taking wealth at a lower rate than labour. In America, billionaires and multimillionaires continue to pay around 12% of their income in taxes each year, while most of the rest of us pay at least twice that rate. So this was written in 2015. I think the majority of us are more sensitive to these issues, and there is so much more to expand upon. But the reason I bring this up is that policies like this reward property owners and perpetuate the belief in scarcity, the idea that there's not enough to go round and the wealthy must fortress themselves against the masses of undeserving poor. I say undeserving poor because that is literally a narrative perpetuated in the media in the UK, where there are people who genuinely believe or are encouraged to believe that people are poor because they just don't have the business sense, or they are somehow not worthy because they are not as wonderful. They are not as whatever. They are the other, basically. This myth is consistently used to reinforce the systems that prevent resources being put toward common use for mutual enjoyment, sustenance, and quality of life. There's a widely held alternative view that resources should not be controlled by a powerful elite, but reclaimed by communities for use by all. Land provides sustenance, the resources we need to feed, clothe, and house people, as well as nourishing experiences that connect us to the natural world. Presumably that is why commoners were initially allowed to gather firewood and collect furs from their local common in England. These resources were needed for warmth and bedding, and recognition of these basic rights became custom. Whilst today we commonly exercise our right to walk and ride horses on common land, we recognise access to fresh air and green spaces enhances our quality of life. And many of us are in living memory of the outdoor childhood where children felt free to roam the fields and to a certain extent the streets. Village greens and farmland, public parks and urban wastelands, forests and wild beaches. Anyone who played in these spaces as a child tasted freedom. Any commercial or intended use was irrelevant. These were our playground. suppose it's possible that not everybody had that experience. But in the time of writing, this was a rallying call for those who at least had the memory. Communities who see their green spaces being repurposed by developers usually know intuitively that something is being lost when the spaciousness of their environment is eroded through commercial interests. In the village where I live, there's a ring of houses surrounding an old school field which acts as their own mini green belt, a scrap of empty land that has become commonly used by dog walkers and for children's football games. Collectively, the homeowners that bordered this expanse of grass and trees sought legal advice to fight a development for housing. The general consensus was that it may look empty and disused to some, but this is ours, part of the village that is both public and shared, and without it, something of the shared village environment is lost. In the English countryside, the concept of common land is ingrained in our collective memory. Ancient bridleways cut through private farmland in villages, sometimes in the most incongruous ways, usually marked footpath, acting as an invitation to exercise our freedom to roam, but frequently surrounded by private, keep out signs, shouting reminders that one's rights of movement are tolerated and limited. I settled in England as a young adult, and inspired by the rights of common land, I wanted to learn more. I discovered it was originally owned by the lord of the manor, that common land rights of use such as right to ride horses, gather firewood or dig for peat, farming and harvesting were applied as an exception to that rule. Permitted by the lord on common land, presumably punishable, crimes of theft and trespass if exercised anywhere else. In this vein, rights of use are still controlled by those with power and wealth, then the lord of the manor, now the government. It appears that what we intuitively know to be true, that once born we have a right to live, to be supported by the planet's resources, its air, water, earth and plants, is different to what we inherited from historical land use and laws of England. Today, more than ever, the only resources we have a right to are those we purchase. The only activities we have a right to exercise are those permitted by the owner of the place in which we stand. In today's highly commercialised global society, our rights are only recognised when we enter the world of commerce. Our belief in the authority of money results in a perceived right to any resource we purchase, including rights of use, exclusive access, and right to profit from any resale. This becomes increasingly problematic when the owner of a natural resource is a corporation, government, or monarch. With commercial interests increasingly encroaching on our access and relationship to natural resources, a map can act as a metaphor for how our movement, resources and freedoms are limited, controlled, partitioned and restricted. I've got two footnotes here that were hidden in here somewhere. Oh yes, the feeling that public shared space is ours through use, not necessarily by law. Footnote 1. My native tongue has no word for the enduring emotional connection people feel to the land. Indigenous cultures, such as the New Zealand Maori, have words that better encapsulate the emotional and spiritual connection to places of personal significance. Take, for example, the Maori word Turanga Waiwai. Literally, Turanga, standing place, Waiwai, feet. It can be translated as a place to stand or my standing place. More than just one's place or origin or ancestral home, Turanga Waiwai are places where we feel especially empowered and connected. They are our foundation, our place in the world, according to the Encyclopedia of New Zealand. And then I was also talking about how our rights are only recognised when we enter the world of commerce. Consider high streets where teenagers are frowned upon for being out of place. Anywhere they are gathered for social purposes. Teens exist in the in-between, not yet having entered adulthood, where they constantly exercise monetary exchange as their access ticket for a place to sit, a pub to frequent, a home to call their own. In one survey, 80% of them, young people, have been told off for playing outdoors. 50% have been shouted at for playing outside, and 25% of 11 to 16-year-olds have been threatened with violence by adults for what? For playing outdoors, making a noise, and being a nuisance. And in fact, after writing this, I found out about law that has been passed that can be, I think it's for protection of public spaces from anything that the local community and the local government deems to be disruptive or... And so it varies from regions to regions what is considered antisocial. And it's appalling. It is further controls. There actually isn't such thing as public space. And so that's why in this, and in terms of free use, and obviously misuse, things that I think there's this problem with how misuse is defined, because to me misuse is something that damages how it is used, or damages its ability to support the life of all of the living beings in that ecosystem. And I think the emphasis, the balance is off. So I use the example of a map of a common land area in England, and I say, I now see each plot of land represents a stake or claim for private use and ownership. Each plot has a distinct boundary, a permitted use, and by extension, a restricted use. Usually a lover of maps, their reference to landmarks and pathways, each with a story and a history. I now comprehend the purpose of plotting land on a map. Plotting land on a map is and always has been primarily for staking ownership and assigning its permitted use. In a landscape that is heavily controlled, partitioned and restricted by profit and power motives, where in the world are we truly free? Philip Randolph said, freedom is never given, it is won. I conclude that the rights of the common need to be redefined for the 21st century. Historically, they were permissions established in response to a common need, such as digging for peat and collecting firewood. How relevant are those permissions today? I'd argue that the needs of the collective are now something else entirely. Where natural resources and land are predominantly controlled and restricted by profit and power motives, we need spaces where the law of private ownership does not apply. Spaces which are reserved for the use of and the benefit of the collective. A proposed definition. The common is a shared or communal space used and repurposed by a community for the benefit of the collective. A space in which people have an equal right to resources and an equal right to participate. The law of ownership does not apply. Nobody can say, you can't participate because I am the owner. Commoners are recognised as guardians and are responsible to ensure the common resources remain accessible and sustainable for continued use by the collective. This could be applied to physical spaces such as forests, beaches and buildings. It could also be applied to non-physical spaces such as the internet or group discussion, and resources and information. I will expand this idea in part 2, where I will propose that art can act as a common platform for creativity and collective discussion, as well as a catalyst for change. Ultimately, a change of mindset is needed, away from the belief in purchasing one's entitlement toward a basic understanding of every human being's value. That our right to access the natural resources that give us life can only be universal if we take a collective view, as well as a collaborative guardianship over the planet, its environments, and the spaces that we build. So I will finish this reading here, and in a second video continue on to part 2 about dialogue, art and the common. I'm also going to set up a Zoom call and a date for those of you who are interested to discuss this, add to it, and put into place some of the conversational creativity that is possible by coming together and sharing what we know, how we see things, and how we can evolve this draft. It is out of date. It is a response to that was formed in 2015, and it's time to expand upon it. Thanks for listening.